On the Mattis visit to Asia, we are joined now by Sung-Yoon Lee. He is a professor in Korean studies at Tufts University. The U.S. president, of course, said some things during the campaign that created some alarm in both the ROK and Japan. Told the New York Times back in March that he would consider letting Japan and South Korea build their own nuclear weapons rather than rely on America for protection. So how important was this trip for Mattis?
It carries many messages, of course, to allies, but also to adversaries and other powers in the region. You know, the meeting between the U.S. Secretary of Defense and Japanese, South Korean counterparts under normal circumstances would not be as newsworthy were it not for the fact, as you mentioned, that Mr. Trump during the campaign last year said many things which raised concern in Tokyo and Seoul. You know, the troops card, U.S. troops card has been used by the United States in the past, but Mr. Trump basically said that Japan, the world's third largest economy, and South Korea, the world's 11th largest economy, are basically free-riding, freeloading on the United States, not paying enough to bear to share the cost of stationing U.S. troops in those countries. And that kind of message, of course, when the American public hears of that, it resonates. I think now Mr. Trump is sending a message to Japan and South Korea, reassuring those allies, also sending a stern message to China that we're going to be firm. And this is not separate from the message coming out of the White House vis-a-vis Iran. Iran and North Korea have a long history of cooperation on missile development. So the Trump administration is striking a hardline pose at the moment.
Well, as you heard, China responding to Mattis' comments on the Diaoyu Island sovereignty, also not very happy about the THAAD deployment, neither is Russia. Are we going to see an escalation in tensions, do you think, or is there any way to tell?
You know, it makes perfect sense from a rational, amoral, perhaps, or rather objective international relations perspective for China, for Russia, for North Korea to raise objection to the deployment of this sophisticated U.S. missile system, defense system in South Korea, and those messages coming out of the United States that the U.S. firmly stands shoulder to shoulder with Japan on the disputed island issue. So, yes, China has reasons to be displeased, so does North Korea. But I think the major provocation will be triggered in the coming weeks by North Korea. South Korea and the United States will engage in a major large-scale combined military operations next month. Springtime usually is a good time for North Korea to resort to a provocation, escalate, and then back down a little bit in the second half of the calendar year and call for negotiations, and that's been a very successful strategy for North Korea over the past quarter century. So what really matters is how the Trump administration will respond to the next North Korean provocation, whether it's a nuclear or missile test or some kind of a lethal attack, controlled, limited, but lethal attack on the South.
There are other analysts, though, who are saying that that's not likely to happen because Pyongyang wants to see what happens to the ROK with the political turmoil there.
You know, the political turmoil in South Korea, the South Korean president has been impeached, suspended, and her fate rests on South Korea's higher court, constitutional court. In this political vacuum, you would think if North Korea were to cause trouble, the South Korean politicians and the public will stand firm against North Korea. That's not how it works. North Korea has to remain a political factor, and the best way to do that is not to behave, but to be a problem, to export insecurity. And in South Korea, which is a rich nation, South Korea does not want to escalate, doesn't have the stomach to stand up to North Korea and to continue to escalate tension with North Korea. So the leading opposition party candidates who all favor engaging North Korea, talking to North Korea, giving aid to North Korea, will argue that it was Park Geun-hye, the impeached president, South Korean president's hardline policy toward North Korea that is the root of this trouble with the North.
Do you think at all that Mattis was also asking these allies to contribute more, since that seems to be one of the campaign themes from Trump?
I've not heard any reports of that issue being broached, and I think it's reasonable that that kind of message perhaps was not explicitly conveyed to South Korea and Japan. But the troops card, again, you know, Richard Nixon, who was a diehard anti-communist, bashing China all throughout the 1950s and 60s, even at the height of the Cold War, when North Korea was killing South Koreans and American soldiers in the late 60s, Nixon withdrew 20,000 U.S. troops from South Korea under those circumstances against really very strong objection from the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So what I'm saying is much remains to be seen, but Trump could bring up the troops card again for various reasons, domestic political reasons.
We'll keep our eye on it. Sung-Yoon Lee joining us from Boston. Thanks so much for your observations.